Good morning. This is Cindy from CPSE, and I'd like to welcome you to today's sponsored webinar, Evidence-Based Deployment and Station Planning, presented by Daniel Haight, President of Darkhorse Analytics. Darkhorse provides software and consulting services to help emergency organizations transition to an evidence-based culture. Dan is an award-winning lecturer at the University of Alberta and the former analytics advisor to the Edmonton Oilers NHL hockey team. At the end of the webinar, please contact Darkhorse directly for additional information and be sure to visit their booth at the 2021 Excellence Conference, March 2nd through 5th at the Caribe Royale Convention Center in Orlando, Florida. Thank you for attending, and now Dan will begin the webinar.
Thanks, Cindy, and welcome everyone to the webinar. And we are going to be talking, I reversed the order. We're going to start talking about station planning and then finish off with deployment. I welcome your questions and I will try to get to each of them and answer them during the talk. And if I'm unable to, please contact me after the fact. So what are we trying to do when we're doing station location or deployment? What are some of the key things we're trying to address? And I've written down a handful of them here. So we're trying to take care of the risk and our ability to respond to risk. A particular metric that's really important is response performance, but so is your workload. In many cases, you're trying to improve the insurance rating of a city. You're addressing citizen perceptions, you're addressing redundancy, or you're maybe moving towards or maintaining your accreditation. So these are all pieces of the puzzle that you're looking to deal with through either deployment or a combination of deployment and station planning. So from a number standpoint, let's focus in on that response performance, because that's an excellent way, or that's the way that the NFPA has decided to address risk, or one of the main ways. And from our research and what we've looked at in dozens of different services, what we found is that if you look at response performance as having a number of things that drive it, on the one hand, you have the response time. So how quickly can I get to something? How quickly can I respond to a call? And on the other hand, you have availability. So do I have a unit available at that location to respond? What you find is every 5 seconds of response time costs you about 1% in performance. So if I can get my travel time down overall by 5 seconds, that's worth 1% in response performance. It also means that if I can get my turnout times or my call handling time reduced by 5 seconds, it's worth 1%. So cutting your turnout times by 5 seconds has a pretty big impact on your performance as a service. I should also say adding a station is in the order of 1% performance improvement for a mid-sized city that doesn't have egregious station plans. Similarly, adding an additional unit has about a 1% performance improvement for a mid-size. So by mid-size, I'm saying maybe 500,000 to 1 million population, maybe 20 to 30 stations. You'll see about a 1% response performance improvement by adding a single 24-hour unit to the best possible place in your city. So that gives you a sense of the currency we're dealing with and the importance. Every second does count. And we always tell people you don't want to solve a station problem. Sorry, you don't want to solve an operational problem or a turnout problem by adding stations. And so we, as a caveat to this entire presentation, I just want to emphasize it's important to get your operational performance under control before you start doing the more strategic or the more expensive planning around stations and vehicle deployments. And just to kind of break this down further, even if you have poor response time, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need more stations. It could be your alarm handling, could be your turnout, it could be just the number of stations or the location of those stations. It could be that you're browning out the wrong station at the wrong time of day for training, and you need to do some move-ups or system status planning. Similarly, on the availability side, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to add more units. You can improve your availability by being a bit more disciplined on your scene time, by changing your schedule or demand scheduling, say your ambulances, adding unit hours or adding units to your fleet certainly make a difference. So do things like traffic preemption or changing your catchment areas. So you're going closest unit response instead of kind of fixed station catchment areas. So all of these things feed into performance. We're going to focus mainly on the proximity that comes from station locations and both the proximity and the unit hours that and schedule that comes from changing your deployment. So response performance is this kind of abstract number. I can get to X% of my calls in 10 minutes and 24 seconds, or in 6 minutes, or in 4 minutes, or whatever the standard is you're judging it by. But we've run into this, and I'm sure many of you have as well. When you're presenting that to your stakeholders or to a city council or a county manager, they're going to say, so what? Why do I care? I have a fixed budget. I'm going to have to allocate some of it to improving roads and building parks, and some of it to your fire or ambulance department. Why do I care that you're above 80% or 90%? Why do I care about 1%? So we did some research on this, and this was back in our academic days. And since then, others have done research. This is based on a study out of New Zealand by Challens. It appeared in Fire Technology in 2010. It basically, this is a summary of it. It boils down to an improvement, an increase in the destruction of property by about 3% for every minute you add to response time. So if you get there, if the fire starts, right around the corner and you get there in 2 minutes, probably 20% of the structure will be destroyed. If it takes you 10 minutes, it's probably 35 to 40% of the structure that's destroyed. So you can see seconds do matter for property damage. And we were actually asked when we presented to council for one of our clients by the mayor, who was a bit of an economist, and he said, yeah, tell me, what is this worth? And so we went back and did this research, and we found for them, adding a single station would save them somewhere in the order of $250,000 per year in property damage. So over the life of that station, maybe $5 to $10 million. And the second thing is survival, particularly survival from heart attack and other kind of critical incidents that require a very quick response. And so similar study, and there have been a number of these, a lot out of Seattle, but this one in particular I liked because it was done in Las Vegas casinos, and they had a very clear picture of the start of the incident, because they could see the person at the casino table clutch their chest, and then they could, so they knew when the heart attack event started, and then they knew exactly once paramedics arrived on scene or began resuscitation or CPR. And so in this case, you see about a 2% drop in survival for every additional minute in response time. So if the cardiac arrest occurs in the presence of paramedics, it's about a 1 in 3 chance of survival. If it takes them 20 minutes to get there, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to survive. And so this shows how the seconds matter and why we use response time as a proxy for our performance as a system. Now, to be fair, these cardiac arrest calls might represent 1% of your medical calls in a year. Your fire calls may represent, structure fire calls may represent 5 or 10 or 20% of your calls during a year. So it's not every call, but you often don't know if it is a high acuity call that you need to respond quickly to. So this is why we build a system that has a quick response. So with that as a backdrop, let's dig into effective station planning. So how do we make sure that a station plan is robust into the future? So that's one of the things. You're making a commitment to property and to facilities that should last for more than just a couple years. Probably 30, 40, 50. I know in some of the cities we worked with, they have 100-year-old stations that have been in the same location, in the same building, and probably many of the same fixtures for that entire time. So how do we make sure that we don't paint ourselves in a corner? And this can happen, especially in a quickly growing city. You will, a new neighborhood will open up, and or a new subdivision will open up, and the houses that are built and the commercial or industrial sectors that are filled out might start on one, in the center and then move out, or may start on one edge and move across. And so in the first 5 or 10 years, one station location in the middle may be appropriate, but by the time it's fully built out, you actually want two, one in the east and one in the west. And if you've already committed to the one in the center, now you've got a bit of a hassle to either repurpose a building or end up with 3 facilities in that new neighborhood or that new subdivision. So you really want to look forward and look at the time horizon of an entire area. So how do we do that? Well, we forecast demand. So this is looking at the historical demand patterns for one of the cities we've worked with. And you can see in their case, they've had fairly quick growth over a period of 5 years. They almost saw, say, an 80%, 70% increase in their call volumes. This is in a major city in Canada. And so the question is, well, is that steep trend going to continue? So we can see this very steep trend from 2013 to 2016. And in their case, a lot of that was due to an opiate addiction epidemic, they called it, and had started to slow down. But then if you looked at kind of a straight line look on one side, you'd see a fairly huge increase in calls. If we got the epidemic under control, you might actually see a decrease in calls, and we have seen that in some places. And so there's a bit of an art to forecasting, and we always say, keep updating your forecasts. Every couple of years, revisit this number. So this is an overall forecast for a city, and see, what happened in 2019, what happened in 2020. Did it stay on the middle line? Is it on the upper line, or is it starting to decline again? And so when you get a sense of that, you re-update the forecast. You're not having to commit to locations 10 years out or 15 years out in most of the time. So never look at a forecast that was done in the 90s and assume that it's going to be correct for 2025. So you're forecasting the overall call volumes, but you also need to forecast the road network. Never do station plans using the crow flies method of assuming your trucks can jump rivers and over top of neighborhoods. So you need to forecast your roads. So sometimes you can work with city or county planning groups, and they will have area structure plans or development plans that show where their intended roads are, especially their major roads. But in many cases, you can kind of do it yourself. So you can see here where we built I think this was a 20-year forecast, a 15-year forecast of the growth of roads. So you can see that we had some major arteries that were added in the west that we knew were coming on stream in the next couple of years. And then over time, there was going to be a build out of these new properties. And we didn't know the actual road network in some of these new properties, but we knew roughly where the main roads were going to be, and that it was going to be a similar, this is going to be a residential neighborhood, this is going to be more an industrial location or a commercial area, and we could build out kind of a similar structure to how it had been in the past. And then the next thing you need to do is you need to forecast location-specific growth. So back in this picture, we're talking about the overall growth in call volumes in a city or a community. But in this view, now we're going to be looking at where is this city going to grow or this community going to grow spatially. So it's the where and the when. And so in this case, they had a couple different options. Like, well, we might open up this new subdivision in the east here. We might do this large development in the north, kind of a new town center. We might do one in the south. We might do all three of those, etc. And we actually built scenarios for them that said, hey, if this is the one that gets approved, here's what you should look at for station plans. If the one in the south gets approved, here's what you should look at in station plans. And we're actually forecasting calls at a fairly granular level. This is about a half a mile square, maybe even smaller, maybe a quarter mile square hexes that we're using to get that granularity that we need. And then we're tying those to the expected road network into the future. So this allows, a lot of that kind of what if planning, because we have this kind of synthetic population that's generating calls 20 years in the future. And it may build out starting on the edge and across, but we want to plan our stations for the long haul, and we want it to be located correctly when a build out is finally complete. Okay, now once you have that road network plan, once you have that demand plan for a community, now it's time to look at the modeling. And so one of the most critical parts of modeling, and which is why we end up forecasting road networks, is your drive times. So imagine we have a station here at number 2 in the kind of Blairmore area, and the halo of coverage that that station provides is kind of shown on the contours or the colors here on the left. So we have, 90% of the time it can get to the area right around it. Maybe 80% of the time it can get to this next donut, and so on and so forth. And you can see that some areas are a little harder to get to based on the road networks. It's not just a pure circle. And some areas we don't even have any people living, so we don't care about those as much. Maybe they're outside of the boundaries of the community. Now, look at this one location, which right under the C in Confederation. So the trip between those two on average might be 2 minutes or 3 minutes. In fact, it was indeed just less than 3 minutes to get to that area on average. But this is a very busy spot. It ends up being a fairly large retirement center, and this particular station was responding into there, almost on a weekly basis over a long period of time. And so with a large sample of data, we got, I think, 350 or 360 some responses in that. Some of those responses were 70 or 60 seconds for the travel time to get there. But some of them took as much as 300 or even 400 seconds to get to. So if I just looked at the average response time, which was about 3 minutes, 150, 180 seconds, I would say, oh yeah, that area is covered. But really, it's only covered maybe 75% of the time. And I actually get there in my target 4 minutes from my station. And so this is one of the key things that the academic literature has realized, is that if you just use an average response time, it will draw a hard boundary around your station, and you'll think, okay, I can get to 22nd Street here, and I can't get to 23rd, or I can't even get a block further, with this hard line. And so you'll locate your stations in such a way that those hard circles are nudged up together, when in reality, it's more of a contour of coverage. And by using a probability of arrival as opposed to just an average drive time, you'll end up with a denser station network, but it'll be more reflective of your true response performance, as opposed to, hey, yeah, our city is 98% covered. And then the mayor asks you, why do you only get 80% response performance if you're 98% covered? Well, it's because you built your station scheme using average response times instead of a probability of response. So again, that's back to my academic roots and some of the work we did at the University of Alberta. All right. The other thing that's important is where those calls are occurring. So sure, this shows my drive time to reach those calls, but there are other things that play into that. One of them is where are the calls, right? So in the area down here, the small hexes, these tiny little dots, maybe you only get one call in that neighborhood in a decade, whereas some of these other areas in the larger hexes, you might get one call a month or one call a week into different addresses. And so the spatial distribution of those calls is also important. And then the other thing is you'll notice that halo of coverage, the green part seems to be a bit smaller. And that's because this particular view that we're looking at here takes into account your availability. The workload for that one truck that's represented by that one tick is quite high. And so it's busy, maybe 40% of the time, 50% of the time, it's out on calls. And so the coverage that it can provide, the odds that it can get to your call are cut in half because it's only there half of the time. And so someone else will have to come in from another station to respond. So the modeling should take into account both the response time and the response probability, but also the unit availability at that station. How busy is that station? And as you can imagine, if I add another truck to this station, the availability improves, and it also improves the availability of the neighboring station, say up here in the north off the screen. And that improvement in the neighboring probability of availability has a kind of a nested effect that re-improves the station 2 availability, and so on and so forth, right? So kind of I help myself, and that helps my neighbor, and that helping of the neighbor also helps me a little bit more, which also helps him a little bit more, which is why the deployment problem of being able to solve this and model this appropriately is very difficult, because it's a very complex chain of probabilities that gives you an estimate of performance. I worked at the university that was the first to address this in the academic literature, and it was part of a PhD thesis back in the early 2000s. And we've incorporated that into our technology and how we approach this. But it's very difficult to solve, and you need to consider how busy your stations are or your units are when you're making station plans or deployment plans. Another thing you're going to look at is workload. So I'm going to introduce you to my favorite little town of College Town here. They are a traditionally understaffed city. They have around 10,000 calls, and they have 3 stations and 3 trucks and 12 people working there trying to handle their city. And you can see where the call volumes are. They kind of have 3 big areas in the north, in the southeast, and in the southwest. And they have 3 stations in the north, in the west, and in the city center. And this station 1 is their large station, and the catchment area that station has to cover is quite large. So its closest response, it can actually get up into this industrial area on the highway here faster than station 1 can, but it also covers that entire southeast corner and even a little bit into what you would think of as the natural station 2 zone. So station 1 is going to be very busy. Now, let's say a new mayor comes along, our response performance is probably in the order of 50 to 60% of calls that we can get to in our target time. And this station 1 is really overworked in terms of their efforts to respond. And so let's say we get new budget and we're going to add a new station down here in the southeast. So we do that, and now we look what happened is this new station has taken on all the calls within this catchment zone, and station 1 now is just going to be covering kind of the east of Highway 11 part of that Confederation area. But the impact that adding that new station has had, it has affected, and it's able to get to 61% of the calls down in the southeast, but it's also improved the performance of station 3. because it's no longer having to come down into here to take on these calls. And so it's improved by 7.5%. It's really helped Station 1. It's gone up from 46% to now 68% performance in its catchment area. And our overall performance is probably improved by somewhere in the order of 15% citywide. So adding that station has an impact on overall performance, but it also affects the workload of those existing stations, their availability, and the size of the catchment area that they're going to have to deal with. So when you do something like this, you can map it out over time. So this is, again, taking into account the temporal nature of station planning. You want to take the long view. And so this is from an actual study we did for I think they were a 2-station city that was looking to add 3 more stations over the next decade or 2, as it was a very fast-growing city. So what we looked at was their current performance was above 90%. And with the forecast that we did, we could see that the speed of growth in that city was such that they were going to drop down to about 80% over the next decade. And we could see that if they wanted to stay above 90%, they would have to probably start looking for and building a station right away. And so we came up with a plan for them, and that showed a fire hall being added in the west. And that fire hall would add on, it would buy them another 5 years of performance before it dropped below that 90% again. It bought them, like I said, for a mid-sized city, you can add 1%. This was a smaller city, they could add 2% by adding that fire hall. And then, you know, they're going to wait until they even drop below a little bit. In 2011-12, they're going to add a north fire hall, and that would buy them time way out into past 2015 to be able to handle the growing city and the growth in call volumes. And then finally, I think we even had a 2016 adding a fire hall in the south to deal with the growth of that particular city. So you can see, showing this and animating this for city council gave them an understanding, okay, yeah, this is why we're building, when, and we also had pictures of where we were building and why those were the best locations, and why the west needed to come before the north, because that improved the overall performance. But there is a trade-off between cost and performance as well that you're obviously going to have to deal with. All right. I see there's no questions so far, but if you do have any, please jump in. I know I'm going a little bit deep on some of the modeling behind this, but I wanted to show you some of the state of the art when it comes to the academic literature on how to approach this. So what else should we consider when building a station? So we talked about response performance. I touched on workload. If you have one station, we dealt with a fire service that they had a single station that was dealing with 10,000 calls per year. And so they were just a single station catchment area. They were literally going from call to call to call all day long. I suspect it was the busiest station in North America. The workload on the staff there was such that they had to rotate people through. You basically did your tour of duty for 2 months, and then you got moved out and got to calm down for a while. So workload can be addressed in some cases by adding stations. So let's go to an even smaller catchment area. We can't add vehicles because the station is too small. We might have to add a station, you know, only 6 blocks away or 3 blocks away to basically get more vehicles into that catchment area. You should consider the size of your stations. Do I build a large station? Do I build a small station? What types of vehicles are going to be housed there? Should I have some specialty units there? Should I put my hazmat or my heavy rescue units there? And so not just looking at total call demand, but looking at, okay, where are my high-rise fires? Where historically have my hazmat problems been? Where's my hazmat risk? Where are my heavy rescues occurring, and so forth? And so you can plan your vehicle type, and you'll have to build a station that can house your ladder trucks or your high-rise vehicles. Obviously, the cost of the property, the cost of the facility. Egress from the facility is very important. Remember, I said 5 seconds of turnout time is equivalent to adding a new station. But if you build a station where everyone has to, walk down the stairs and through the mess hall and through, a bunch of the cleaning area, across a bunch of bays before they get into the truck, it might be 15 seconds right there that is lost just from the way you built your station. And so egress is extremely important in being efficient with the dollars you've been given. And obviously there's going to be politics. And we show views of not just the overall performance. In a city like Toronto, adding a station is only, 0.25% performance improvement. But for a particular district or city ward, it might be worth 20%. So Councillor Johnson is going to be very excited about getting their response performance from 50% to 70%, or from 70% to 90% from adding that station, and dealing with the equity associated with all the different districts in the city. And there are obviously other considerations that you should look at. So I want to talk briefly about one of the trends that we've seen kind of come and go over time, is the idea of let's build this super station, single start station. And when the accountants look at this, they love it because we just need one set of cleaning staff and they can go through and clean all the vehicles. We get one storage area where we stock up on all the supplies. And, if one crew is working overtime because they're on a call past the end of their shift, and their vehicle isn't available, there's bound to be another vehicle available for the guys coming on shift. So it's a very efficient, seemingly efficient way to deal with this response. But the problem is, it might take you half an hour to drive from your station, central station or single start station, to the post or the kind of field station where you're going to be parking for your shift. And so that's half an hour at the beginning of the shift and half an hour at the end of the shift. And that's not too bad in a 24-hour, but if you're on a demand shift, that's more than 10% of your time is gone just driving to and from work. And so you've lost the productivity associated with that, especially if your single start station is out in the suburbs somewhere, because the land is cheap and you need a large footprint. So from our analysis, this is almost always not a cost-effective way to improve your performance. It looks good in an initial blush, but in general, it doesn't really help. It actually hinders your response performance and, again, your overall cost as a service, dollars per percent performance. Small stations are actually what we recommend. The proximity is so powerful that having 2 stations with a single unit is more valuable and better from a patient perspective than a single station with 2 units covering the same catchment area. So small is better. It's easier to sell or reuse or reconfigure, and it also really improves that proximity part of the equation. One thing that we've seen is a move towards mixed-use stations. So building your fire hall at the base of a high-rise, and this is a requirement in some cities, but there still seems to be some resistance in some quarters, like, oh, well, the noise associated with this. And so I'll tell you one story. We worked with one city that the fire department had an entire city block devoted to one of their older stations right downtown. And they came up with a deal that the land that alone that they were sitting on was worth $250 million. So they came up with a deal with a developer to tear down the old station and build something like you see in this picture, a station at the base of a high-rise, sell the land to the developer, get that station for free, but also get $240-some million to spend towards additional stations throughout the city. So they basically turned one station into 10 by repurposing the land that they were sitting on into a mixed-use station. And you'll start seeing this more and more as people realize kind of that giant station that takes up all this property is not an efficient use of resources. And so I always tell people that if I have a cardiac arrest, I really don't care if a bystander resuscitates me, or a police officer, or a paramedic, or a firefighter comes and defibrillates me. From my standpoint, I just want them to come quickly, because my odds of survival increase with every minute of time they can shave off of their response. And so what the implications of that for planning is, you probably shouldn't co-locate ambulances and fire if you're two separate departments, or ambulance and police and fire. And often they don't like to play well together, but you're better off spreading out your bases or your posts or your stations to really improve the proximity, and taking into account the fact that, oh, well, given that the ambulance is going to be posted there, we shouldn't be right across the street from them. Let's move a little bit further away. So your plan should really take into account the other agencies, whether those are mutual aid agencies at the edge of your boundaries, or the alternatives where people can get a response. So thinking from a patient perspective, you'll get a different station plan than you will if you're just thinking of your own service and its response. So to summarize the station portion of this conversation, poor locations can cost you a lot. You can build a station in a poor location, and it may be the closest responder to 1 or 2 calls a year. So you basically have people sitting out there using your facility as a place to hang out, and a kitchen and nothing more. Well-located stations will remain so for decades, and there is a life cycle that neighborhoods go through, and they get busier as they age beyond a certain point, and then they revitalize, and they get busier with a different kind of calls, with kids getting injured in playgrounds, and then they might get quieter as the empty nesters take over. But that life cycle is a shorter term thing than your station plan. And so think of the entire life cycle when you're building. Keep your forecasts up to date, keep them robust. Accurate drive times are crucial. Like I said, 5 seconds of drive time is worth 1% performance improvement, which is worth 1 new station. Getting that right is critical, and using Google Maps drive times is not quite right. Your vehicles will actually get to your closer calls more slowly than Google Maps will suggest, and they're going to get to your further away calls more quickly because of your ability to do traffic preemption and to drive above the speed limit. So getting those estimates done correctly is really important. And some of the work that I was involved with back in the academic days was on developing estimates for emergency vehicle response. You can look that up or contact me and I can put you in touch. But it takes into account like an acceleration rate and a cruising speed for your vehicles, which tends to be different than what you'd find for a car or a truck on the road. I already talked about the expected performance and thinking small and mixed use to be more cost effective, and avoiding co-location to be more patient-centric. So that's it on the station planning and what I'm going to talk about. Some of the services we offer as a company have to do with doing station plans, and we've done it for everything from a single station service looking to add a second, right up to a 80 station city that is replacing 10% of them every year because their deferred maintenance costs more than the property itself. So the ability to make those plans, to keep them up to date, and to optimize station locations is one of the things that we love doing and we're excited to do. If there are any questions, again, feel free to jump in at any point. I'm going to shift gears and talk about deployment, which my definition is how many and what kinds of vehicles should you place into your existing station stock, or when you're adding a new station, How many bays should you build in that station for how many vehicles to be deployed there? So why do we worry about deployment? The truth is your vehicles and your crews represent the bulk of your budget. That's your ongoing costs, and it's going to cost you tens or hundreds of millions of dollars over the lifetime of a station. And so getting your deployment right has a huge impact on your cost, but it also can render a good station plan ineffective. If you only staff it with a single unit when it needs 2, or you staff it with 3 units when it only needs 1, it's a huge waste. And really, the impact of deployment is more on your ERF performance than it is on your first due performance. So I'm going to talk about ERF, which is, for those, you might use a different term, effective response force, which I believe the NFPA standard right now is 10 minutes and 24 seconds for 12 firefighters on scene, and there's some more specifics on the types of vehicles that also need to be there to deal with a low risk structural fire event. And there's a medium risk ERF target, and then there's a high risk ERF target. And the way you impact this is driven more by the personnel that you make available than it is on the station location or the number of vehicles. So again, we talked about the proximity driving performance, and deployment is really affecting your unit hours, your schedule, your fleet size, but also the location of your vehicles or the system status plan or move up plan that you use to drive performance. So I want us to go back to our favorite city of College Town. So they have a new council and they struck oil under the downtown, and the city is raking it in, and they're willing to commit to more staff. So you can see at the left here, our response performance for the first unit getting into a fire call or a medical call was 58% of the time in 8 minutes. We can get 1 unit there. Which isn't great. Our average drive time is over 5.5 minutes. And in a typical year, there's 800 and some fire calls that we're not getting to in our target time. Although we're out of the 2,000 fire calls that we deal with. So we have our 3 stations, our 3 units, and 13 staff. And so let's say that windfall comes in, we have millions of dollars, and we can spend it. Actually, before I go to that, the performance for our first due unit, getting 1 truck into the calls, is 58%. But our performance of getting 12 firefighters into a call is only 16%. So why is that? Well, we only have 13 staff in the entire city. So we have to take all 3 of our trucks, 1 from each station, to get to any call. So if a call happens way down here in Rosewood, the odds that we can get all 3 trucks there in 10 minutes and 24 seconds is effectively 0. Maybe we can get to the areas right around station 1 with all of the vehicles into those, but unlikely. 16% of the time we can get there. So the vast majority of our calls we're not going to be able to get to in our target EFF time. Okay, so what can we do? Well, we can add units to our stations. So in this case, we add a single unit to each of the 3 stations, and we see what difference that makes. So now we have 3 new trucks, and in each one of those, we're adding 4 firefighters on each vehicle. So now we have a total staff of 25 instead of 13, and you can see our performance jumped a huge amount. We're almost at 45% from adding an additional truck in each of those locations. But we're still not really where we want to be. So we've added to the system, but we have this huge area in the southeast which is uncovered, and we need to address that. So let's add a new station down in the southeast, and with that, let's add 2 new vehicles. So that's what these little ticks represent. So with those 2 new vehicles, we finally get over 50%. We're now able to get 12 crews on scene in 10 minutes or less, roughly half the time. Okay, so that's great. It looks good. The mayor's happy, council's happy, the fire chief's happy. But can we do better? So is this the right deployment? This is an equitable deployment. We have the same number of people in each region of the city, but is that what we should be doing? Could we do better if we were to redeploy some of those vehicles to different stations? And so if you played around with this, you would find that indeed you can. If I took one of the units out of Station 3 and moved it to our new station, and I took one of them from the downtown and moved it to our Station 2, we actually see a huge, another 15% performance improvement. So now we're almost at 70%. And these areas of Blairmore and Lakewood, Natana are actually very well covered in our ability to get 12 firefighters on scene in 10 minutes or less. So we've really addressed our ERF performance. And so having what looked like an equitable performance or an equitable, everyone's equitably bad, we've now improved that a huge amount by not adding any staff. So this is kind of a free lunch for us as long as we had room for those vehicles in those two stations. So that's what good deployment will do. It can take a mediocre performance and make it approach good performance without adding any resources to the system. So that's great. Now let's zoom in on Station 2 and let's see why we have such good deployment or good performance. Well, it's because we have 12 staff already staffed in that area. So only one station has to respond to any calls that occur in Station 2's catchment area. Similarly, in the new station catchment area, we have we're staffing our engines with 4 firefighters, so we're able to get that full 12 staff on scene. But and I know that it's a great day when all your staff show up in your entire city. What happens if one person doesn't make it today because they got sick or they came down with COVID or something like that? As you can see, the difference from just taking away one person from that engine. Now, maybe you can still respond with that engine with a 3-person crew, and you're not going to brown out that vehicle. But even so, you're not getting 12 people on site. You're only getting 11 people on site from Station 2. So now you have to call in a vehicle from your downtown station to respond into any calls that come in Station 2's area. So that single person costs you about 9% in performance in your ability to respond to calls. So you don't have a very robust system the way you built it right now. So you might want to consider having an extra crew member there or adding another vehicle in that general area, or going to 3 3-man vehicles and 1 4-man vehicle in that area to respond to those calls to better deal with your performance on an ongoing basis. All right. And this is talking about deployment, which is typically done, on a 6-month cadence. You don't want to be changing your deployments up, every week or every month. Your team members get upset about that unless you're in like that very busy station I alluded to earlier on. But one of the things you're going to want to look at is redeploying your vehicles, moving them from a less busy station to a more busy station. And there are software packages out there that will do it for you. And they're like robots, and they look ahead half an hour on what's likely to happen, and then they tell you where the holes are and what moves you should make, and really powerful software that can do that. And what we found is it's always difficult to balance off the marginal improvement you get from redeployment or move-ups with the added fatigue and the added cost you put on your vehicle maintenance in doing that. Your crews are always going to remember the times that you moved them from Station 1 to Station 2 on the other side of town and then back again, and then the call came in from where you moved them from. They're always going to remember that, and they'll call you the stupid dispatcher or the stupid move up software that made them do that. They'll never remember the times that it was a good move. And you'll get crew fatigue and you'll get complaints, and there is a cost associated with that. Now, what we found is there are typically a very small number of moves that you need to consider just doing every time it happens. When we get a call downtown in 13, we got to move someone in from that east side station, which is really quiet, and they're going to cover off the downtown during that time frame. And that gets us probably 80% of the value from move ups is doing the 1 or 2 or 3 different moves on a regular basis. But there are other times when you're going to build a deployment plan because you're looking at a slightly, shorter than a 6-month horizon, but longer than that daily move up plan. So there's a construction project. The overpass on the freeway is down. Our station right next to the freeway is going to have to divert, a mile down the road to be able to respond across the freeway. So should we still deploy 2 trucks there, or should we move one of them across the freeway to bolster one of the other stations there? Maybe you have a station that you brown out for training from time to time. Should it be your busiest station? Probably not. And you can test that by doing a bit of a deployment analysis. Maybe your local sports team wins the Super Bowl. So for Sunday afternoon, you're going to shut down the entire, downtown because of the parade. So where should you put your station, or where should you deploy your vehicles to best respond to the expected calls that are going to come during that major event? So there are ongoing needs for deployment. There's that kind of redeployment move up plan. There's that construction project station brownout major event type deployment, which may be happening on a weekly or monthly basis. And then there is that kind of, all right, another 6 months has passed, road networks have changed, demand patterns have changed, we have more budget, we're adding a new truck, we're closing a station, how does my deployment change to best cover my city? And again, if you're doing deployment well, you're going to be gaining 1 or 2 or 3 or 4% in response performance, or as we saw in College Town, 10 or 15% by doing it right. And we call that a free lunch. You're not having to buy new trucks and new stations to solve a deployment problem. You're just doing it well. A couple other considerations. I already talked about move ups. It is worth considering demand staffing, particularly for your EMS calls. Putting an 8 or 10 hour shift on during the day. Your call volumes for medical calls are typically going to be 3 times as high at 3 p.m. as they are at 3 a.m. So having all your ambulances staffed 24 hours doesn't make a lot of sense. The same thing is true for fire vehicles, although I know the union considerations make that a more difficult sell. But even looking at demand staffing for seasons, if you're in a resort town, you're going to want to staff more towards the beach during the summer and the suburbs in the winter. Or if it's a ski town, you might need to staff up during the winter and actually add crews and deploy them appropriately during the seasons that you get busier. What we found in the past is the seasonal stuff tends to not be as important as the time of day stuff. You don't get, unless you're a really busy tourist destination, you're not going to see that 3x difference in spring versus summer versus winter, but you see based on time of day. Similarly, day of week, the differences might be 20% or 30%, but it's not going to be as important as the time of day stuff. So that concludes my presentation about station planning and evidence-based deployment planning, some of the approach that we take to deal with this. We have some additional resources available on our website. We have a station planning guide that kind of walks through a lot of what I talked about today and some additional stuff. It's a bit of, probably a 10 or 20 page ebook We have a couple webinars, how to build a digital culture, which is, kind of draws on both our work in public safety, but some of the stuff we did in sports. If you ever saw the movie Moneyball, there's a whole bunch of fantastic lessons on how to get your team thinking analytically, and it's not something done very quickly or easily. And then how to build a defensible strategic plan using analytics. So again, we're big believers that analytics is something that has to be baked into your recipe. It's not some fairy dust that you sprinkle on top of your planning to kind of make it more legit. It really needs to be part of your process and part of your thinking. I had an instructor used to describe it as this: you don't bake raisin bread by baking bread and then using your finger to poke the raisins into the bread after you're done. And I think a lot of people try to do that. Here's the final report, add some analytics to it to make it look good. You really need to have this to be part of your process. And so we have a webinar that talks about that. We also have, probably 20 or 30 blog posts about very specific items, like how we've seen other services improve shoot times or turnout times, how we've seen others deal with performance issues, how others have transitioned to to an evidence-based culture. We have some interviews with people about, I think one on community risk assessments, another one on analytical culture, and so on and so forth. So please visit our site, make use of those webinars. Our goal as a company is to work with public safety organizations to improve decision making. That's our mission. So we're all about the knowledge transfer. We want to teach you to fish as much as we can, and we develop these tools to help us do the consulting work that we've done over the years, and now we realize that those tools are very valuable to hand off for certain organizations. So we have both the software and the consulting that we offer as a service. So with that, I'll just check and see if there's any comments or questions. And we have none at this point, which means...
Actually, Dan, you do have a lot, several questions.
Okay. How come I cannot have questions?
Look in your chat or under questions. I have them. I can read them to you.
Yeah, can you read them to me? They're not showing up here at all.
Okay. Let's see. Is there any consideration for building type, building height? This can affect getting to the source of the fire patient.
Yeah. Time to patient side or time to pulling the hoses or starting suppression is absolutely important. Very few departments actually track this. There are some estimates of what it is, and we actually build in an estimate of that when we're doing station planning, particularly in really dense high-rise areas.
Okay. NFPA 1710 sets response time objectives and specifies a 90% performance level target, and most recently has been amended to require their parameters to be applied to each individual station area. How would you approach that challenge?
Yeah, I mean, the software we work on out of the box would do that. You can look at performance citywide or by ward or by station catchment. So, you just need to take a subset of your area and look at the performance within that zone. But you have to keep in mind that your catchment area is not just going to be busy on its own calls, it's also going to be responding to the areas around it. So make sure you think of that. But it can also receive help from those areas around it. Similar for mutual aid, if it's at the edge of your zone, you can look at that.
Okay, I think we have time for one more. What are your thoughts on unit hour utilization and non-emergent tasks for unit availability, inspections, training, public education, unit hour utilization?
Yeah, everyone has their own way to calculate this, as do we. We calculate it from a standpoint like, what is reality? How available are you to respond to a call? What we found is that this can be pretty significant, and if you don't incorporate it in your plan, you're going to underestimate the impact or overestimate your performance. Just maintenance on vehicles we found was up to about 5% of unit hours were tied up in vehicle maintenance, and typically at a bad time. Maintenance was tied up during the daytime, where your call volumes tend to be triple what they are at night, and so it'll have a huge impact on your performance.
Okay, so that's it. Just want to let everybody know this webinar has been recorded. It will be uploaded to Darkhorse's, I guess, your website. An email will come out to you all later with the link and their contact information. So if we didn't get to your questions, please, reach out and ask them directly to Dan. So that's it. Do you have anything else, Dan, you want to wind up with?
Well, I'll wind up with, sorry, I should have had it on the contact page. Those whose questions were not answered, you can email me and I'll get back to you right away. And yeah, if you'd like to talk further about this stuff, we'd be happy to chat.
Okay, well, thank you all so much, and everybody have a great day.
Take care.
That
Bye-bye.
concludes it. Bye-bye.